in the 06010.
Hello and welcome into Fantasy Focus Football presented by Wingstop. Alongside Stephania Bell and Field Yates, my name is Daniel Dopp, diving into everything that is the end of Week 15. First week of the fantasy playoffs is in the book after, in the books? I guess it's multiple. It's always plural.
Well, I don't know how to read, so I don't know if it's a book or
fair.
books. I've never read either a singular or a plural number of books, so.
I don't believe that. As a
That's not
Wesleyan
fair.
grad, I
I
don't
know.
believe that one bit.
You know what,
Field
actually,
Yates.
quickly, the best book that we have right now at our house, and it's incredible, and my daughter laughs every night, Fritz the Farting Reindeer.
Oh,
it's amazing. If you're a parent out there, you probably have already. It's so good. So good.
I love it. All
Never
right.
not fun.
Okay, I love it.
Off to a hot start here.
Yeah, I'll have to pick one up and bring it home so I can read it to Manny sometime before we go to bed this week.
I'll get it for
My
Rico.
20-year-old is going to love it.
Hey, Manny, before you're 21, you can buy booze on your own legally.
That's right.
Let me read you Fritz the Farting Reindeer.
I'm going to share it with Rico.
Why not?
Rico.
He would love it.
He would
love it. Oh, my God.
We got a couple of Monday Night Football games that we are going to recap, as well as diving into a few injuries that happened, unfortunately, this week, Stephania, and how you should potentially attack them
Always.
on the waiver wire. A little mailbag as well. So it's going to be a very, very full show. Unfortunately, no Liz Loza.
Yep.
She said, I just can't work with you people more than 2 days in a row.
done.
She watched the Bears last night. And she was like, I'm too sad.
I can't do
what
it.
we saw last night. Yeah, as the Bears obviously unfortunately fall in this game, Daniel.
Let's dive into it. Monday Night Football, we'll start with the Bears and Vikings Field,
Yeah,
Yates.
let's do it. And, you know, I feel like just generally speaking, my tenor from last night, it applies to both games, but in this one as well, is that we got some solid performances, but no, like, miracle comebacks on Monday Night Football. So in this game, the Vikings win 30-12. Pretty dominant effort all the way around. Justin Jefferson, solid, right? I mean, you're not going to complain about 20-plus fantasy points for Justin Jefferson. There probably was even more meat on the bone. He had that narrow miss of a touchdown that could have been. But as far as like things that surprised me last night, we kind of got the Vikings, right? It's like, okay, so Justin Jefferson, just over 20 fantasy points. That's what you expect from a wide receiver one. Aaron Jones, nearly 19 fantasy points. That's what you are hopeful for a guy who's a top 15 option.
Yep.
Jordan Addison continues his hot streak. He has 7 catches for 63 yards. He's about a wide receiver 3. Those are about wide receiver 3 numbers. TJ Hawkinson looks pretty good as well last night. It's sort of like, other than Sam Darnold, the Vikings were just like exactly what you hope from them.
Pretty chalky, yeah.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think the biggest thing that I noticed was the fact that, you know, and we have seen this from Justin Jefferson. He hasn't been like the crazy volume Justin Jefferson of late, in part because Jordan Addison has just really had a lot of targets here recently. You look at the last handful of weeks, Jordan Addison has now seen 8 or more targets in 4 of the last 5 games. That's not meaning that Justin Jefferson isn't getting his. Justin Jefferson did have 13 targets in this one. But Addison has clearly come on as a very dependable wide receiver 2 in this offense.
Well, it's interesting. So same number of catches as Justin Jefferson last night with 7. And I think, you know, Jordan Addison, to me, just to push it forward a little bit, number one, he's a flex play. Like, if he's a flex option for me and I'm still advancing in the fantasy playoffs, I'm putting him in because clearly he's going to be targeted, and we saw the kind of performance that he can have.
Yep.
But I think going into next season, he's going to be one of the most interesting wide receivers to rank for me because if you go back to this year, remember he had the ankle injury early. He missed week 2 and 3 because of the ankle, but he also had a disciplinary issue that was silent this year that has, I think it's in January is the next time that they take a look at it. So coming into next season, there might be the looming suspension, but he's going to be coming off this high of this performance. So just something to keep in mind. Now, it's going to be really interesting to see where we place him next year.
Who's the quarterback going to be starting the season next year? Susan?
So I would say, by the way, I do believe, like, he kind of reminds me of what we've seen from Jerry Jeudy of late in the sense that, like, high pedigree players, usually not the kind of guys you want to give up on too early. But I don't know who the quarterback will be next year. If I had to place someone right now, I'd probably say J.J. McCarthy, going out on a limb there. But maybe the biggest storyline from the Vikings last night was that Sam Darnold was a letdown. 11.24 fantasy points, and for a guy who's been red hot of late, 20-plus points has been kind of an expectation for Sam. I didn't think he played awful. It wasn't that. It was just that.
Sort of mediocre.
Well, they had 2 separate 1-yard touchdown runs by Aaron Jones. He did throw an interception, and the Bears defense, you know, they are actually pretty solid. We sort of lose through that. We sort of lose that because of the fact that the offense is such a massive work in progress, and that's probably being polite towards that Bears offense. But yeah, a disappointing night for Sam Darnold. If you got by into the fantasy semis, it's probably not because of, it's in spite of Sam Darnold. All that being said, they draw Seattle this upcoming week. Sam Darnold's been so good of late, and these offensive playmakers are so elite that my confidence in Sam hasn't waned that much relative to where it was going into this past Monday night.
I think I'm with you on that as well, Field, because anytime you have these divisional games, in spite of what the records are between the two teams, you just know that they play each other very tough.
Yeah.
I think that I would still be in the same spot. I've got Sam Darnold, I believe, inside my top 10 at quarterback again this week. We'll talk about that more tomorrow when we do the rankings show.
Sure
on the
will.
other side of this, let's talk about the Chicago Bears, because these pass catchers, it feels like we're just playing Chicago Bears pass catchers roulette.
Yeah.
Like, who's going to be the guy that's the wide receiver one in this offense? We've seen it be Roma Dunze a handful of times. We've seen it be DJ Moore a handful of times. This week, it was Keenan Allen.
Yeah, it was.
13 targets, 6 catches for 82 yards and a touchdown. Good enough for 20.2 fantasy points. DJ Moore didn't let you down. He still got you 15 fantasy points. You love to be able to see that. But it definitely was those two guys more than anything. Anything you want to add on the pass catchers before we talk about DeAndre Swift?
No, we all really think highly of Roma Dunze, but they're playing 2 wide receiver sets or even 1 wide receiver sets. He is going to be the 3rd wide receiver on. So while he saw 7 targets last night, did Roman, he dropped a touchdown pass late in the game that it was one of those, like, the ball is flying a million miles an hour, that, like, on the first look, it almost looked like it was deflected right before Roma Dunze had a chance to reach for it. Upon replay, it looked like just kind of sailed right through his hands, so that might have redefined the night a little bit. But let's just sort of take a big step back, remove ourselves from the names, and just say, all right, you've got a passing offense that over the past 3 games has totally struggled. Remember the first 2 games of Thomas Brown calling plays? Caleb was looking rock solid, 26.1 fantasy points or more in both of those games.
Yep.
The last 3 hasn't been great. So you don't generally want to trust a 3rd wide receiver for fantasy unless it's an elite offense.
Yeah.
When it's a mediocre offense, hard to say that you're going to get exactly what you're hoping for. I will rank them. DJ Moore 1, Keenan Allen 2, Roma Dunze 3 going into your semis, and probably a player you don't want to be starting.
Yeah, unfortunately.
It's just hard to evaluate the offense, and without going into it. Obviously, what we're concerned about is the fantasy playoffs here, and I do think the roulette wheel continues. I think Keenan Allen remains like this safety blanket for Caleb Williams when he can find him. That connection is real, but it's hard to evaluate in the context of the offense because the offense is not in sync. And going back to what Field said, when the offensive coordinator becomes the interim head coach, things change, and things change in his relationship to what he can do with the quarterback. So I think we're seeing that throughout the offense.
Yeah.
DeAndre Swift, unfortunately, disappointing again this week.
Man.
If you had to trust him, 4 straight weeks below 10 fantasy points. Obviously, we know that this Vikings defense is a good rush defense, right? You saw a lot of work from DeAndre Swift, 20 touches.
I know, but I do think the injury is factoring in here. I mean, he has been banged up for a while. He came in questionable with a groin injury. He only had 1 limited practice this week.
Yeah.
He was not practicing the rest of the week. He's had a quad issue before. Like, he's being asked to do it, and I think he's playing through it. But when we saw him go on 4th down, they give it to him to run, and the power's not there. And that's not necessarily what he does. But I don't think he's not going to make those kind of plays for you. And you look at a couple times when the offense sputtered there and they had to turn the ball over, there might have been another opportunity for DeAndre Swift in plays that are better manifested for him. But I do think the injury is factoring into what we're seeing.
He's a hard guy to move too far down the rankings because the workload's going to be there. They flashed a graphic during the game last night that showed 5 running backs, just 5, have at least 10 carries in every game. We're talking about the usual suspects, guys like Derrick Henry, right? James Conner, who have been outstanding this year. So for me to sit here and say that DeAndre Swift is like running back 41 would be disingenuous. At the same time, not nearly enough touchdown equity in this offense to feel great about him going forward, and not a ton of passing game utilization for Swift as well.
I wonder if things get a little bit easier next week. Everyone has been worried about that Detroit Lions defense, but with how banged up they are, I'm just curious. No Lee McNeil, who's now done for the season. The linebackers are real difficult,
He's a flex.
unfortunately.
That's what I would say.
It kind of feels like, I might have a little bit more confidence that I would have if this Lions team was 100% healthy.
Yeah, for sure.
So, all right. We're going to dive into another Monday Night Football game. When we come back, stick around. We'll see you guys in just a moment. ESPN Bet Live returns on Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern and is everything that you need to know before betting this week's NFL slate. Aaron, Joe, and Tyler return on Friday, and we'll be with you throughout the weekend with all the picks, props, and parlays that you need. Check out ESPN Bet Live. Back here on Fantasy Focus Football, my name is Daniel Dopp. Alongside Stephania Bell and Field Yates, this Monday Night Football game we can maybe be a little bit more efficient with. Congratulations if you made it all the way through it, is all I want to say. It was not fun. Falcons and Raiders.
Here is the way that I would summarize this game. I never thought that I would be saying this in the context of fantasy football. I miss Aiden O'Connell.
Yes.
Because what we saw last night was a complete disaster on offense for the Raiders. It's a totally non-functioning offense with Desmond Ridder. It's not personal, it's just a fact, right? There was not a single catch by a Raiders wide receiver until the fourth quarter.
That's
it
brutal.
was so
3 quarters
painful.
without a single catch from a Raiders wide receiver. It was a disaster. And more important than the wide receivers, Jacoby Myers obviously a really good player, but the fantasy league winner that we thought we might have on our hands is Brock Bowers. And there are two things that happened last night, I believe. It's hard to track these things meticulously on every single snap in general, especially when there's 2 games going on. I think the Falcons last night said anybody else can beat us. It ain't going to be number 89.
Yeah.
And Desmond Ridder was not good last night. So Brock Bowers goes for a total of 6.5 fantasy points. 3 catches, 35 yards on 6 targets. What are you going to do? I mean, the offense is so bad. This is the 3rd dud in 4 weeks for Brock Bowers. You know, we talked about how for like a stretch there, it was like Malik Neighbors kind of became the guy that we thought he was going to be coming into the season, right? Unfortunately, and it's a much smaller sample size of time, and things have changed with the trade of Devontae Adams, but it's like one of the concerns for Brock Bowers was sketchy quarterback play. Sketchy might have been a kind way of putting it because it's been awful, and I think, Aiden O'Connell's back this week.
I mean, he was the emergency quarterback last night. So if he had to go out there, he had the bruised knee. He wasn't really able to move around. And probably for his own protection, it's wise that they didn't have him play. Sure. But boy, the guy who almost beat the Chiefs, I would like to see him back. And Brock Bowers, lifting up Brock Bowers and his fantasy potential in the final week of my playoffs or the last 2 weeks of playoffs.
We got a waiver ad now too, right?
I feel like it. Yeah, unfortunately, Stephania, it looked like Sincere McCormick left this game with an ankle injury. Is that what it was?
Yeah, he hurt himself on a 1-yard carry in the second quarter, initially labeled questionable to return because the ankle ended up being ruled out at halftime. So we shall see what the week delivers, but that's unfortunate because he was another, bright spot for us in fantasy.
And a player who's had an incredibly bad string of injury luck. I mean, that was why we haven't really heard this name 2 years ago, coming out of college, major knee injury. So it just sucks for the player. This is the time of the year where teams are obviously they're always mindful of player health, but if you've got something that's a 2-week injury and it's week 16, you might just say, see ya, in the offseason program. So be prepared for some Amir Abdullah
next man up,
and Alexander Mattison. If you're looking for some slivers of hope because you either were relying upon Sincere McCormick or you've got some other running back injuries, keep in mind they do play the Jaguars this upcoming weekend. So from a game script perspective, you might see a decent amount of volume. Abdullah was
he looked good actually.
He always looks
pretty good last
He always looks fine, right? Because he's a really talented pass catching back. He had 7 catches last night, including a nifty play towards the end of the game to kind of give the Raiders some life. But this Raiders team, largely not a fantasy relevant squad.
Yeah, and unfortunately, like the play that Alexander Mattison had that was most notable to fantasy managers was probably getting stopped in the end zone for a safety, which was tough. He just didn't have a lot of efficiency in this one. But if you need a pass catching back to throw a dart on, it would be Amir Abdullah in the waiver wire this week. On the other side about this, it wasn't much better for the Falcons, guys, to be honest. Kirk Cousins field, when I'm watching Kirk Cousins, threw the ball 17 times. Total. 17 times. And it seems like Drake London thanked the Lord that he was able to find the end zone in the first quarter. Otherwise, it would have been duds for every one of those pass catchers in Atlanta.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, Kyle Pitts largely a non-factor once again. Although I think he had 3 catches, so that's actually an improvement.
He had more than Darnell Mooney, who had a single target in this one.
0 catches for Darnell Mooney, so dud city. This is about the quarterback. We were talking about this before the show, the 3 of us offline, and Stephania, he just looks old.
That's it. We talk about these guys coming off Achilles injuries. We've said it about Aaron Rodgers, but you can't separate from either him or Rodgers the fact that they are older quarterbacks with a bad injury as well. It's interesting because I went and I saw both of them do some work in the preseason, and they were moving fine, but you just don't have the threat of people coming to tackle you. And that speed is a whole different level of speed. And it's not just speed, it's quickness and awareness while you're doing other tasks. And that's hard when you're coming off a major injury. And I think you see it, like Kirk Cousins a couple times, he couldn't get away. Felt like a shoestring tackle that shouldn't be.
Correct.
You know, when he'd get taken down, like you should be able to get away from that. You're just a step behind. And then a lack of power sometimes with his throws. And remember, his was to his back foot, and that is responsible for launching the ball a little bit. So the struggles are real, and it felt like they were very visible last night.
Yeah, Drake London had seen over 45 targets in his last 4 games, seeing over 11 targets per game. He had 3 targets in this one. Darnell Mooney, only 1 target. Just across the board, it doesn't feel like any confidence you had in Falcons pass catchers were not alleviated last night.
So what you almost need is this, and I'm not sure you're getting it next week. They play the Giants. Is like right now the Falcons. To me, it was very clear from the Falcons' perspective last night. Let's just win this game
get out
and
of
get
here.
out of Dodge. Right?
You need to play from behind. We need to get the ball down the field. We need that game that they had. What week was it when they?
The Bucks. Whenever they played the Bucks twice, right?
But didn't they? But was it the Eagles they played earlier this year?
Yeah, they played them.
When they had that huge passing game, and I thought that's what we need.
Yeah, because we need that. Because last night, 17 passing attempts for Kirk Cousins. I don't know that it gets better against the Giants this upcoming weekend, but you're right, Daniel. It was a lot less volume for Drake London, who still, you're not going to cry about 14.5 from an excellent player, just not a lot of volume.
Great route on that touchdown catch by for what it's worth.
Yeah, and then Bijan, it's funny. I thought Bijan was once again remarkable last night, and yet the fantasy production is just solid, right? 14.5 fantasy points, but no touchdowns because the only touchdown they scored was that Drake London touchdown, and then just 1 reception last night for Bijan. So, guys, just with a doubleheader and it being the first round of the playoffs, I think there was this feeling going into the night like we might get some magic here. And I'm not saying that people didn't come out with unlikely results. We saw some narrow margins of victory or defeat. But, some of the performances we've seen of late, these back-to-back weeks from Josh Allen and Puka and Jamar Chase and Devontae Adams, a lot of that magic has taken place during Sunday football as opposed to Monday Night Football. So Sunday football has served us a lot better than Monday did last night. So not too many
We got a lot of different days of football this week. We got Saturday football, we got Sunday, we got Wednesday football. So maybe we're going to have some magic happen in other spots.
Yeah, we have so much football coming up in professional and college ranks. I am just giddy about the next month ahead.
It's going to be very, very fun. Yeah, hopefully we have some better primetime games from here on out because both of these, I don't want to say that Minnesota and Chicago wasn't as fun to watch, but you
get Bucks Cowboys on Sunday night and Saints Packers on Monday night.
Okay,
at least Lambeau would be
the
fun to watch.
You know what? I'm going to be excited it's football. You know why? Because as soon as football's over,
we're going to be begging for
I'm going to be asking for anything. I would take those in a heartbeat. All right, when we come back, we're going to dive into the Week 16 waiver wire, talk about a couple of injuries you need to know about. We'll see you guys in just a moment. Remember to tune into Fantasy Football Now on Sunday and join me, Mike Clay, Field Yates, Stephania Bell, Damian Woody, Liz Loza, and Eric Moody as we get you ready for Week 16 of the fantasy season. From injuries to rankings, we got you covered. Find us over on ESPN2 this Sunday starting at 10 a.m. Eastern all the way up until kickoff. Back here on Fantasy Focus alongside Stephania Bell and Field Yates. My name is Daniel Dopp. We're going to dive into the waiver wire, but in order to do that, Stephania, I want to talk about a couple of injuries first.
It was a big injury week. It's very interesting if you watch the NFL and the injury patterns as long as I have. Huge spikes in the start of the season, especially for all the players who don't do a lot in preseason. They're getting acclimated to football. And then it sort of levels out. And then another spike when you get late in the year, and that's what we saw this week.
We got a handful of running backs that we're going to dive into. One that unfortunately really hurts my heart.
I know.
David Montgomery, Stephania, ended up leaving this game early, unfortunately, against the Buffalo Bills. Then we got news that he was potentially out indefinitely.
Yeah, he did leave for a bit, but he actually came back. I mean, David Montgomery had this knee injury that not everyone really saw when it happened. I mean, there were a couple spots, if you go back and look at the videos, and I'm going to go back and watch the game again more closely to see what I pick up. But there was one time where he kind of grabbed at his knee, another time where he got caught in a pile, but he popped back up. And when you think about the fact that he had an MCL injury that now, according to Dan Campbell, is going to require surgery, it's remarkable that he was able to finish out the game. but it serves as an important reminder for all the people who say, well, he finished, it couldn't be that bad. Yeah. There's a lot of adrenaline, there's a lot of things happening in a game. You don't always know until you get out of the game what's going to happen. The other thing, people have probably heard me talk about MCL sprains and say, these are often things that don't require surgery. It's a ligament that has a good blood supply. You don't always need it. Sometimes there are other structures involved that we're not hearing about. Sometimes it's just the location of where the tear is that makes it amenable to surgery. Remember, Kyle Pitts had an MCL injury that ultimately required surgery, ended his season. We found out later he also had a PCL tear as well. So hoping for the best for David Montgomery. Certainly been a bright spot, but I do want to give a shout out to our teammate Mike Clay, who's not here today. But he had a really great tweet last night about what Jahmyr Gibbs did when David Montgomery was absent. Maybe this will make you feel better, Daniel. I mean, early on week 3, it was he had a lot of touches, but only 9.2 fantasy points. But if you look at week 7 and week 8, I mean, he was ending with career highs, and not that you want that much work on Jahmyr Gibbs late in the season. You do if you're a fantasy manager. I was saying for Daniel and the Lions fans are like, protect him at all costs because you want him healthy into the playoffs. But for fantasy purposes, Jahmyr Gibbs could really take off.
I have 2 thoughts here. One is that this is the most straightforward, if one guy gets hurt, what does it mean for the other guy analysis? And all fantasy football, Stephania just echoed what Mike said. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be a top 5 or top 6 at worst play for me this week. Maybe, just maybe, and this might be maybe like trying to take it a step too far here. What do we know about David Montgomery? One of the best finishers at the goal line in all of the NFL. Perhaps you see just a little more hope for a guy like Sam Laporta in the red zone / near the goal line. But I don't think we need to overthink this one too much. Jahmyr Gibbs has a chance to score 25 points a game for the final 3 weeks of the season.
And this isn't a situation where the Lions are just going to keep that committee back going. I love Craig Reynolds, pride of Kutztown University, but it's definitely going to be the Jahmyr Gibbs show, unfortunately.
It sure will be, and they have a ton to play for. Even if they win these next couple of games, there's definitely a chance that, I mean, we're talking about the potential for 3 teams being in the mix for that number 1 seed going into Week 18.
Yep, a lot on the line. All right, let's dive into these Week 16 waiver wire decisions. Stephania, Alvin Kamara also left the game early, so David Montgomery not the only guy, but we know Montgomery's going to be out for a number of games. What do we know about Alvin Kamara?
Yeah, they called it a groin injury, originally questionable to return, ends up not coming back, and Darren Rizzi, when he was speaking to reporters, said it was an adductor. That is also a very specific term for groin muscles. So that's your inner thigh muscle. Not only for lateral movement, but really important for power and explosiveness. So a bit of a concern. They thought it happened when he made the diving touchdown catch. And although Rizzi called it minor, then when he was asked about it, he said, well, he didn't want to make the medical determination of minor. Alvin Kamara there's actually a YouTube video out now that was done by our friend Mike Triplett, and it's looking at his preparation and how he takes care of his body and the things he's played through. Very insightful. So if he has a chance to come back, I think he will. Yeah. But in his potential absence, or if the workload is shifted, it's Kendre Miller.
It is, and we've been waiting a long time for this. Remember, this was a 3rd-round pick out of TCU, not this past draft, but the year prior, and the player that we kind of thought had some ability and some upside. And then he kind of just never saw eye to eye with Dennis Allen. He had a very, very, in his own eyes, controversial.
Going on IR.
Yeah, plays on IR this year, kind of in his own eyes, like out of nowhere. I mean, not out of nowhere, but he was not expecting to go on IR. He's the next man up. Small sample size, but he ran 9 times for 46 yards. This past week. They play Monday Night Football, so you kind of have the double-edged sword there.
Yep.
On the one hand, Alvin Kamara has an extra day to get right.
Yep.
On the other hand, if you're counting on Alvin Kamara and you don't have Kendre Miller, it's going to be dicey unless something comes out on Friday and they say, hey, or Saturday or Sunday, we expect Alvin Kamara to play. So I would absolutely 100% grab Kendre Miller, available in 92% of leagues right now.
Yeah, if you have Alvin Kamara and you're planning on him being one of your starters and you're rolling that dice, you have to have him on. You have to have Kendre Miller on your bench. Also, if the person you're playing has Alvin Kamara, go out and grab Kendre Miller because you want to limit their potential opportunities to be able to grab someone. A little bit of defense.
Well,
here.
The other thing I'd say is what is a little bit scary about this, just in general, like the situation for Kendre Miller is just like, so the Saints, with no Chris Olave, no no Rashid Shaheed, no real depth at wide receiver. Like, there might be no Alvin Kamara. Probably Spencer Rattler. Who knows? But, Derek Carr, as of yesterday, still in concussion protocol.
Are you saying it's not a very efficient offense?
Well, what I'm saying is, maybe grab the Packers defense.
Yep.
And also, if you do have Kendre Miller, there is the threat in this circumstance of, he's the guy, but he goes 12 carries for 36 yards.
Right.
That's what you're scared of, because we are seeing so many more offenses that, Sincere McCormick had been happy to see him play and play well, but it's what's the upside for these players who it's going to take a lot just to get into the red zone, much less goal-to-go situations.
Yep. He did find the end zone 2 weeks ago, so hopefully if you do have to play him, he can find that painted area.
I think that was against the Giants, though, right?
I think it was a better matchup than what he's going to have.
Yes, it was the Giants.
Yeah. Let's dive into Tony Pollard, Stephania, who left this game with an ankle injury. We saw a lot of Tajay Spears after that. What do you know about Tony Pollard?
Well, he came into the game with an ankle injury. This has been a problem for him since originally injured in Week 10. He's been off and on the practice injury reports, playing through it. A lot of admiration from the Titans for him continuing to play through this ankle issue. It did cause him to leave the game for about 10 minutes. So, then we saw a little elevation for Tajay Spears, but I don't know what's going to happen this week. You're just going to have to watch the practice reports. He has played through it so far, so I think if he can, he will continue to do so, but this may be what you get.
Yeah, make the ad, and you probably won't know until Sunday morning, truthfully, because Tony Pollard's been going DMP, limited, DMP, and still playing on Sunday. But what I will say is this. We do know more about Tajay Spears than I think some of the other players on waivers this week. This guy in back-to-back seasons has averaged exactly 7.4 yards per catch. He was very productive in the passing game, albeit with game script in his favor last week. But the Titans, game script might always be in the favor of throwing the football, and he had 100 carries for 453 yards last season, did Tajay Spears. He's been banged up this season. He's dealt with a concussion. He's not a big back, so I don't want to ideally give him the ball 20 times a game, but 3 weeks left in the season. If Tony Pollard is not available, Spears, a nice insurance ad to grab right now.
Taking on the Colts next week, who have allowed the 6th most fantasy points to the running back position. So if Tony Pollard doesn't roll, hopefully you can see some more passing game work for Tajay Spears. Stephania, Evan Ingram, we found out, I believe, going into Sunday that he had been placed on IR, done for the season now, unfortunately, for Ingram.
Unfortunately, this is it. Field's actually the injury expert here because he's had this particular surgery. But what I will say, Evan Ingram was planning on having surgery soon. Saw him in advance of the game out there with the fans supporting the team. So he hasn't had surgery yet, as far as I'm aware, but upcoming, and should be no problem for him to be ready by the start of next season.
Brenton Strange had gotten some time on again, off again earlier this season because Evan Ingram dealing with a hamstring injury earlier this year.
Yeah.
Field, he's just a 23-year-old kid, second year in the league, former second rounder, and he didn't. I mean, this last week he crushed it. Got a ton of volume from Mac Jones.
Yeah, 11 catches this past week. I mean, he was the most heavily targeted Jaguars wide receiver. A strange occurrence, as Stephania wisely noted. You guys decide which sample size means more to you. Earlier on this season, those 4 games that Evan Ingram missed, remember at the very beginning of the year, Brenton Strange totaled 12 catches for 120 yards. He did find the end zone twice, so while I am not expecting another 11 catches like we saw this past Sunday, if you're really desperate right now at tight end, and by the way, you might be. Zach Ertz, concussion protocol. Obviously, Evan Ingram is now out for the season. We've had some guys going the wrong way of late. So if you're looking for a tight end pickup, he is certainly amongst the most notable who's available in a ton of leagues.
Yeah, and maybe he and Mac Jones have a special connection.
Yep.
And at this point, do you feel super strong if you had lost Taysom Hill? Let's say you were rolling with that and you added Juwan Johnson.
I mean, look at how bad he was last week. Yeah.
So it feels like there's at least an option here.
I do have a good exercise for Evan Ingram when he gets about a little over 3 months down the road from surgery, which is, do you guys know like the balls that you see in a ball pit, like for kids?
Yeah, yes, of course.
Like, they weigh like, I don't know, whatever, half of an ounce. One of the things that is at this stage of my rehab very important is like throwing a ball like for 5 consecutive minutes a day, like throwing it against a wall, which first of all, like sometimes I just don't catch it and I have to go fetch it and all that stuff.
Of course.
We have a ball pit, and so I just grab, call it it's not actually a shopping cart, but like a shopping cart worth of ball pit balls and just throw them back into the ball pit. It's awesome. It's great. The shoulder feels loose at the end of it, and they're not heavy at all. It's great. So Evan, friendly tip for
there we go.
fellow labrum guy out there.
I love that.
We're not
Is that
recommending
ever part of the
treatment
protocol?
on our
That's
show.
right. That's
Is that
right.
something you had in the protocol book?
Yes. These are you're doing.
But can you at least understand why it would be a nice, soft toss, right?
Yes. You're trying to get the shoulder motion back. Kind of restore that normal
I
movement.
feel like you need to set up the kids' basketball hoop on the other side of the room so that you're at least trying to,
I'm just laughing at the visual of Evan Engram wandering around going, I have no idea what to do for rehab. But
Yes.
Field Yates said,
You know what, though?
I
Field
should
said-
pick up
On
a
that one
plastic
line on,
ball and
December
throw it
20,
because there's
whatever,
nobody
18,
out there
yeah.
helping him out with his rehab. But
Another option here for us on the Week 16 waiver wire. Playoff Stash is brought to you by Wingstop. Talking about guys you want on your bench here for the fantasy playoffs. Stephania, Nick Chubb left this game with a foot injury. What can you tell us about Nick Chubb, and then we'll dive into his matchup?
hearing that it's a foot fracture, but Kevin Stefanski said on Monday that it does not appear he will need surgery, which thank goodness for that. Small silver lining for a guy who's been through so much. And I just want Nick Chubb to be healthy.
Yeah, we all do.
He proved so much by coming back this year and uplifted his team at a time that they needed it. But no Nick Chubb for the rest of the season.
Well, this last week, it was clearly the Jerome Ford show once Nick Chubb left. Pierre Strong only had 6 snaps in comparison to everything that Jerome Ford did. Feels like he's going to be the next man up in this backfield.
Yeah, and I talked about how we have seen Tajay Spears a decent amount. We've seen even more of Jerome Ford, right? Because he took over for Nick Chubb. Yeah, last season, and then obviously this year as well. It was the Jerome Ford show. So he had multiple games earlier this season to begin the year with 10 or more rushing attempts and exactly 7 targets in each of those games. So take a look at the depth chart right now for Cleveland. By the way, I am anticipating a quarterback change this week. We got a few of them.
That.
I expect a DTR week, which we'll dive into that more throughout the week because it's a big problem for everybody else.
For the pass catchers.
But I do expect that Jerome Ford will be the lead running back. And I do think he'll be joined by Dorian Thompson-Robinson as the starting quarterback, with Jameis Winston is perhaps the third quarterback this week.
Wow.
Yep.
I mean, if there is hopefully a silver lining for this, next week they take on the Cincinnati Bengals, who have allowed at least 14 fantasy points in 3 straight games to running backs.
Yeah.
So if you're just looking for a decent floor,
Right.
hopefully Jerome Ford can
He
provide
should be
that
very
for you.
busy. Yep, agreed.
All right, when we come back, we're going to dive into the Fantasy Focus mailbag, answer some of your questions here heading into Week 16. We'll see you guys in just a moment. Download the ESPN Bet Sportsbook to claim your new player bonus, and for a limited time, unlock access to 30 days of ESPN Plus to stream exclusive live sports. Sign up with the promo code FANTASY to get started today. Back here on Fantasy Focus alongside Field Jason Stephania Bell. My name is Daniel Dopp. Let's take a couple of questions from the Fantasy Focus playoff mailbag. My friends, Andy has a question. Says, interesting RB2 dilemma.
God.
Would you rather have Isaiah Pacheco or Travis Etienne? It is a full-point PPR league. Field Yates, I'm going to start with you. Pacheco has yet to hit 10 fantasy points since returning. Travis Etienne hasn't felt much better, to be honest.
I was going to say, this feels like the lesser of two evils. So here's how I landed on Isaiah Pacheco, Andy, is that I'm hopeful for 2 things. That he gets stronger by the week. If, and we don't know this, but there's certainly some evidence, or there's some signs that it's going to be Carson Wentz and not Patrick Mahomes. You got to figure they'll lean into that running game even more than they have because they don't have the best quarterback on the planet. On top of that, the Raiders play the Jaguars. A couple weeks ago, when the Jaguars played the Titans, a game they won, we saw it was the Tank Bigsby show. If they can keep this game close and competitive, meaning the Jaguars, it'll be Tank Bigsby again. So I'm going to lean towards Isaiah Pacheco here. It's close, Andy. It's, again, it's not a choice that inspires a ton of confidence, but that's how I landed.
Yes.
That's exactly where I was going because of the Patrick Mahomes
Quarterback
potential situation there.
Do you have any major updates on that, Stephania, or are we still going to continue to monitor that throughout the week?
No, it's going to be a day. I think it's going to be a day-to-day situation. I anticipate, so it's a high ankle sprain for Patrick Mahomes. We've seen him play through these before, but there's obviously a lot that the Chiefs have to balance, including the 3 games in 11 days situation because they play again on Christmas. So I would say that they have to be mindful of the big picture, but you also got a guy who wants to play and will want to play through. And I just think with 2 games in close proximity, they're probably going to lean towards the conservative side.
Okay. I don't know this. I don't have this nailed down, but just let's use some logic here. 13-1, okay? If you win 2 of your next 3 games, you're in. Number 1 seed, it's clinched over. If you go into Saturday, you say, let's just see what happens with Carson. if you win that game, it buys you time.
Yes.
You could just say, hey, we got to split the final two. Buffalo ain't losing, right? Buffalo's playing the Patriots twice and the Jets. The Bills are going 14-3. You got to get 2 if you're Kansas City. I think you feel like there's a chance you can get 2 with Carson Wentz, and maybe you just sort of play this one week by week. But yes, I'm off the spot of Isaiah Pacheco. I still like him over Travis Etienne.
Love that. All right. We got 2 starting quarterback questions. First one comes from BM, wants to know, Bo Nix, Anthony Richardson, or Justin Herbert. We talked about all 3 of these guys recently in the second half of the year, Field. Obviously, Bo Nix hasn't really had the rushing that kind of led us to this point, right? To help us get to the fantasy playoffs. Do you have a lean?
And you're coming off the worst performance of Bo Nix. Here we've been telling people, Bo Nix for your fantasy playoffs. Yeah. And then we get last week.
Didn't feel great.
It's close, but I have Bo Nix.
Yeah.
The Chargers defense has led up over the past 2 weeks. They were carved by Tampa on Sunday. I mean, that was just a masterful performance by Tampa, obviously. But over the past couple weeks, they have not been the same defense that we saw. The Patrick Mahomes-led Chiefs, they moved the football a little bit against them as well. So I will take Bo Nix. Richardson, another week this past week where the opening drive takes place. He gallops into the end zone. And we're so back until we're not. Yeah. Oh, man. We haven't talked enough about the A.D. Mitchell play on this show.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, my gosh.
Anyways, we can talk about that more at a different time. That's just what are we doing here? And then Herbert, just a tough matchup, right? Just a tough matchup for him as well.
I feel like I would go with Bo Nix as well, in all honesty. It feels like if you want to start...
It's the upside, right? Yeah, because that's the one guy who's good. Well, actually, not true. Anthony Richardson
could be bigger upside.
But you've got a little bit of the scaries with what could happen there. Yep. And I feel like with Bo Nix, we've seen more consistent trending upward, and I would look at last week as a bit of an outlier and look for him to bounce back.
All right. Our buddy Matthew had the same question, Bo Nix or Anthony Richardson. I really appreciate Matthew Berry sending us questions, though. Just being able to help us set his line.
I'm going to lean towards Bo still, obviously.
All right. Dimitri wants to know.
Say that? I'm going to lean towards Bo. I just answered that question.
You're already did it. Yeah, you're going to keep going with that.
People were wondering.
Dimitri wants to know, I started Juwan Jennings, got 5 points. I benched Brian Thomas Jr., missed out on 30-plus. Which one of these 2 do I start in the second week of the playoffs?
Well, welcome to fantasy football, by the way. This is how it works, right? We've told you this many times. You make the logical choice, and then the other thing happens.
Right. We all love Juwan Jennings here. So, I actually, saying to just start Brian Thomas Jr. is really nothing, not an indictment of Juwan Jennings, who last week was really his first bad game. There are a few caveats here. When Brock Purdy was starting, and when it wasn't snowing, and when there was no Debo or Brandon Ayuk, right? He was 5 for 5 on being money under those circumstances prior to that. So I still have Juwan Jennings ranked pretty high, but Brian Thomas Jr. is on a heater right now, and the volume is out of control. I mean, he's the entire offense basically. So to me, the answer is Brian Thomas Jr.
I think that's where I'm at, too. I don't think that I can go away from what BTJ is delivering for this team as kind of like the de facto #1 pass catcher. And again, we talked about Brenton Strange earlier in the show. I love what he did this week, but we're not expecting that kind of volume moving forward. And even though he's got Mac Jones, I mean, this kind of feels like, so let me ask you this question. Brock Purdy, still love Brock Purdy, everything he's done. Yeah. But do you have enough confidence in Mac Jones to say, you know what, I've seen enough from him to feel like he can at least competently get Brian Thomas Jr. the football?
The volume is so good. Let me just pull up the numbers here on Brian Thomas Jr.'s recent performances, because it's pretty silly what he is doing volume-wise right here. Sorry, let me just...
And if nothing else, you know that he's the focal point.
Yes.
And in the 49ers, week to week, you don't know who exactly the focal point is going to be. So
to Stephania's point about being the focal point, over the last 3 games, Brian Thomas Jr. has 36 targets. So that's 12 a game, 10, 12, and 14.
Wow.
He's turned that into 22 catches, at least 75 yards in each of those games, with 3 touchdowns over the last 3 weeks. So hard to go against that kind of volume and that kind of production for BTJ. Just a truly, truly special player. I believe right behind Malik Neighbors is the second highest scoring rookie wide receiver. Very, very promising rookie class here. For him to be #2 speaks volumes.
Good for him. All right, we got another question here. This one comes from Auburn Man. Says, Amari did not provide me anything this week. I'm down 17 points to the undefeated number 1 seed going into week 2 of the first round matchup.
Brutal.
What receiver should I start in place of Amari Cooper next week for maximum upside? Jamison Williams or Devontae Smith? This is a tough one.
It is.
I was going to say, how dangerous do you feel?
Yeah.
Well, if we asked this question 5 days ago, it would have been obvious. Maximum upside, you go with Jamison Williams, right? Because he's
your big play guy.
Yeah.
He's one, he can get you double-digit fantasy points or he can get you 5.
But after Devontae goes for the massive game this past week, you're saying to yourself, well, he does have that in his bag too, right? Like 2 incredibly talented wide receivers from Alabama who were drafted 10th and 12th overall, just a couple of years apart. Devontae Smith, former Heisman Trophy winner. Devontae Smith. My answer is still going to end up being Devontae Smith. It's close, though. I think the maximum upside, here's the reason why. That Bears defense we watched last night, pretty legit. Obviously, J-Mo can go for 163 and a touchdown. But if you're looking, I think both of these guys have legitimate upside. This is not one of those where, again, if you were to ask me, just making this up, who has more upside? Is it Jamison Williams vis-a-vis, I'm trying to think of, your token, medium upside player. Maybe Keenan Allen's a good example, right? Keenan, obviously a really solid player, but I think the upside is probably about close to where we were last night. I think J-Mo does have more upside. The chance to get to 30 points exists for J-Mo more so than most receivers. Devontae right there as well. So I picked Devontae. It's close. Bears, Lions this coming Sunday in Chicago. One of the few Detroit outdoor games. I'm sure it'll be cold as all get out. Going to be cold across the nation this week, it seems like. So a lot of chilly games. Thankfully, we will be inside a comfy studio wearing makeup.
I know. I actually lean towards Jamison Williams.
Do you?
It's a good one, yeah.
Field basically made my argument for me. But I have a bigger question, which is how Auburn man feels about deciding between 2 Alabama players.
Yeah, good call.
Wasn't Amari Cooper also Alabama? Or did I make that up?
Amari Cooper was Alabama as well. Yeah.
So he's got 3 Alabama wide receivers. Look at that.
On the good side, I'm looking at the weather for Chicago on Sunday. It's just gonna be cold. Everything's gonna be cold. Cold and sunny.
There's a lot of they have to account for a lot of folks. The Bears do. A lot of folks on the Lions offense.
Yeah.
And I believe the Lions offense is going to be very, very active.
This is going to be one of those things, in all honesty, and not just to jump in as the de facto Lions fan here, but that defense is so banged up.
Oh, man.
Right, that's what I mean. They have to be aggressive early, I think.
There's going to have to be one of these, and obviously every team wishes they had Josh Allen, right? I can't just be just do what the Bills did. Well, the Bills did Josh Allen. Yeah. That's what,
I don't know. Jared Goff hung right in there this week.
But if you can make them be in a spot where, now that you don't have David Montgomery, we lost Ali McNeil, who was a huge defensive tackle for us in the middle. Obviously, the linebacker situation, we're starting a bunch of guys that we signed off the practice squad. Carlton Davis, our number 1 cornerback, now out indefinitely with a broken jaw as well. I mean, there are just so many injuries on the defensive side of the football that if you told me that in Chicago was able to put some points on the board and Detroit would have to keep up with that, the Lions offense is going to have to be what gets him into this conversation because the defense right now is just falling apart.
18 players on injured reserve you have.
It's brutal.
It's really uncanny.
I have kind of a counter thought to that. I don't know that Chicago has the horses to move the ball against Detroit, but what I do wonder is the Lions are down right now. But this team is wired in such a way, because of the head coach, Dan Campbell, that regardless of who the opponent is, I wonder if the Lions come out hair on fire, manes on fire on Sunday.
Yeah.
Is that who cares? This is not college football where style points count. Whether you win by 1 point or 100 points doesn't matter. But it's we're coming out on Sunday to remind people that the NFC North still runs through us. The NFC will run through us once the playoffs begin. And if that means hanging 40 on the Bears, we'll take it.
Dan Campbell this morning said, I don't care if we win by 1 point. You're going to see me all smiles.
Yeah. Oh, I hope so. By the way, let's get that man
a
coat
out
for his nose. He just needs a little bit.
Yeah.
I believe it.
All right.
He's Rudolph.
He is. All right, when we come back, we got more here on Fantasy Focus. Stick around. We'll see you guys in just a moment. The best part of fantasy football and ESPN Fantasy is you guys, the fantasy football community, and we want to make sure that we're always answering your questions. Head on over to Twitter. Use the hashtag FFNow to drop in your Week 16 lineup questions. Use the hashtag FFNow. Tune in this Sunday on ESPN News at 10 a.m. Eastern on ESPN2, to see if your questions can make it onto the show. Back here on Fantasy Focus, we're going to dive into a little fantasy football conversation here. But before we do, I want to throw this tweet out there that came up last week. End of last week, I saw ESPN Fantasy retweeted this. And it's a leak that kind of went viral.
Yeah, it did.
These two players, and this is kind of what the tweet is. 2 players in my league benched all of their players in order to force a tie and eliminate me from the playoffs. I've tried to explain that this is cheating and collusion, but they think they are being smart. Do you think this is a strategy or is this collusion? Which one do you want to start?
I have a very strong opinion about this, so I'm fine with starting.
Go for it, yeah.
It's collusion.
Yeah.
And to me, it's about the spirit in which you decide to play fantasy football. I get it. We all want to win. And, sometimes you're playing for pride and sometimes you're playing for prizes. But in the spirit of what brought you to the table to play fantasy football, in what world are you doing this where you're conspiring with another player about how you're going to bench you're not going to see anybody play. I get it strategically. Sometimes you have a player that you sit, or you have a kicker who's been errant lately, so you're like, I'm not going to take a chance on getting negative points from my kicker. But to negotiate with someone else that if we do this and we don't play, this will end up being the result. It's just not cool. It's not in the spirit of the community of fantasy football, in my opinion.
So Dynasty Dorks, by the way, Dave from the industry, shout out to Dave. This sucks. It sucks, man. Like, there's only one way it doesn't suck. If it was actually Mike Clay who tweeted this. And
Exactly, yes.
But no, I'm with Stephania. It's so funny. Like, we care about this. It puts the food on the table for us, right? This is our job. This is not just a job, but for each of us, it's a passion that is rivaled by very few other things in our lives. It really means the world to us in a lot of ways. Not the entirety of the world, but a lot of the world to us. At the same time, part of what I love about fantasy football, for some weeks better and for other weeks worse, is just the idea that we get to suspend reality and watch chips fall because of 22 moving variables in every single play, and you feel like there are so many things that are in your control, and yet there are so many things that are actually out of your control. We're just doing it for fun. Like, yeah, it's nice. Like, I get it. There's often money on the line, and if there is, I understand why you want your wallet to benefit from your wins. But guys, like, you're having fun doing this. Like, those 2 teams that were, one of them was at risk of missing the playoffs, and one of them was going to make the playoffs if they had won this matchup. Like, my feeling is, like, that's what the first 13 weeks of the season were for, prior to week 14. It's like, just finish the job. Like, someone has to be in, someone has to be out. I feel like it's kind of lame. It sucks for Dave. Just play it out. Play out the string, man. Have some fun here. Live a little bit.
I feel like
listen, am I going to be, like, did I have some moments last night when I was sitting on the couch downstairs and I looked and I was like, why am I profusely sweating? It's 12 degrees out. Yeah. Do we take this too seriously sometimes? Yeah, we do. But it's still fun, right? Like, it's still fun at the end of the day.
I'm just going to say devil's advocate. Okay, that's all I'm going to say, and you guys cannot agree with me. That's fine.
I'm going to be shocked that you're going to be the one who's going to come out
and I
favor
understand
of this.
that. This is honestly, though, an unbelievable strategy. If you're saying one team was already in the playoffs, another team makes the playoffs. First off, you can't prove it was collusion because you can't look at my phone, in spite of the fact that the FBI tells me none of my text messages are actually secure.
Dude, there's that drone outside of this building.
I know. It's just gathering information
So you're
right now.
saying it's coincidental that 2 players benched their entire roster?
I'm saying that we can't know for a fact. Now, if someone wants to put a lawyer on retainer, obviously Caddy Yates is available, Field Yates, to be able to help figure this one out.
For a small cost.
Yes, I just think that this is really, I wouldn't do this. But I think it's so interesting because what these guys are saying is, I'm going to lose the battle in order to have a shot at winning the war, right? I'm going to lose this week to give me a shot to be able to get into the playoffs to make sure that I can at least have a shot in the fantasy playoffs. I don't disagree with the things that you guys are saying. It very likely is collusion. But, like, I also think this is an unbelievable strategy to be like, you know what? What if we didn't talk? What if we didn't talk and I just put everyone in my lineup on my bench, and then someone else looks at it and they're like, you know what? I think I see what they're doing. But we didn't talk about it. Is that still collusion?
It's still not in the spirit of why you're playing the game, right?
Okay.
Are you really playing it to bench all your players and deliberately have this
I thought the spirit of the
situation?
game was to try to win a championship, and if this is the best way for me to win a championship, then, like, that's the. But I understand what you guys are saying.
Your argument is flimsy there.
Yeah, it is. And who says you're going to win? Like, you could lose, and I'd be sitting there rooting for you to lose.
A little bit of negative karma you're throwing into the fantasy universe when you do that.
So I mean, look, okay.
All right.
War Room League. I'll apply my own situation. War Room League. I have Jeff Darlington in a matchup the last week. I mean, this isn't like the same thing, but my point is I beat him. I was all talk about how I was going to beat him again. We are tied. Last night, I think, after Keenan Allen catches that pass from Caleb Williams.
No, you go up.
Scott Clark posts a screenshot that I'm up like 116.74 over 116.14. So now I think I have a chance. Darlington comes back and beats me with Jacoby Myers suddenly finding a life late in the Raiders game.
Yep.
Totally unfair. I wanted to win because I wanted to repeat as champion, something rarely done in that league. But I had no opportunity to do one of the things that we're discussing here. But what I'm saying is I would not have done that to take away from just the fun and the of just going for it and seeing if you can actually make that happen or not. If I didn't deserve to win, my team didn't show up, they didn't play well enough, I'm out.
Okay, very fair. I want to ask you one follow-up question, and then we'll dive into our actual topic here. Let's say that you are where Stephania's at going into the game, right? It's like 116.1 to 116.5. You're up by 0.4 fantasy points. Are you okay with saying, you know what, I've got a kicker in a really bad weather game that I don't want to, and I get big negatives if they miss field goals? Are you okay not starting a kicker or not starting a defense? Or are you guys like, I need to start an entire full line?
I personally play out the string in all those circumstances. Now, if it's one of those leagues where your kicker gets a 5-point deduction,
minus 5 points,
fine. Yes, because that is something that was a rule that was at some point discussed amongst the league and probably fairly regularly works against somebody who has a lead. But generally speaking, I am a fan
play them out too.
Playing all the way out the string.
I also think that this is just a situation where it's like, I think the right answer is every single one of your fantasy leagues should have some form of a constitution that says you have to play all your players every week, or you have to, like, in order to alleviate some of these things that can potentially come up. Not every league has this where you have a set of rules, but I think it's really valuable. The Fantasy Focus Show League does not have a set of rules like this. However, we are going to dive into it really quickly. It was me taking on Jackson and Stephania taking on Mike Clay right now.
I didn't really take him on.
I'll tell you what. You want to start with yours or do you want to start with mine?
No, I think we know the answer.
Well, how about this? I was not in the fantasy playoffs of the Fantasy Focus Show League, and I did not follow this meticulously. You want me to just break these down based off what I see? All right, let's take a look at the results from the quarterfinals of the Fantasy Focus Show League. A reminder that we had two teams on a bye. Those two teams were our producer Tyler and Trophy Smack, Smackdown, talking the smack, and let's take a look at the scores. This one first is Daniel Dopp taking on Jackson Agello. Jackson started out hot this season, and then he met his match as Daniel dropped a toasty 181 points. Is that correct?
181 thanks to Lamar Jackson and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Packers defense got me 16. Trey McBride got me 17. Nico Collins got me 17. Honestly, across the board, I had a really good lineup. I didn't have a single player outside of my kicker and defense score under 14.6 fantasy points.
Yeah, terrific week. Wait, your kicker, no, Monty scored 7 points.
You're right.
All right,
David
so
Montgomery
you take care of business. Tough day for Jackson. Had a great team, but Puka Nacua was, a little more human this past week. We talked about Drake London to begin the show. Jackson had a really, really strong team all season, but unfortunately met his match. So you now have a decision going forward, Daniel, to fill in your flex. Do you have an obvious step-in guy for Monty or no?
I've got Xavier Legette, Kareem Hunt, and Isaiah Davis.
Okay.
So right now it says no. Yes.
Okay. So you might have to hit the waiver wire this weekend. There are some options there, but Daniel advancing to the semifinals, and you will play
Trophy Smack,
who had a great team. They won the league with the best regular season record. The other matchup, of course, was Mike versus Stephania.
You tell me if you've seen a team get more punched in the face by bad performances when you needed them most.
Yeah, Stephania, unfortunately for Stephania, this was just, you kind of knew it after Thursday night, right? So Cooper Kupp
gets 0.
George Kittle, not that much. 10.1 fantasy points. Debo, unfortunately, was what he has been all season. And then the icing on the cake was Darnell Mooney with a 0. That being said,
and
Stephania.
And Derrick Henry was 6.7. It was terrible.
Yep. In the interest of, giving credit where it is due, Mike had a great week, right? Mike had a great week. He had 164.1 points as he had Jalen Hurts plus Mike Evans as the two horses here, but strong performance all the way around, including 15 from his kicker last night in Will Reichard. So Mike will take on Tyler, our producer, who had an excellent run as well this season. So the semifinals are set.
Mike has been able to use Zach Charbonnet 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see what's going to happen there.
Yep, and he has George Pickens was the sort of the pivot to Charbonnet came on the day in which Pickens was ruled out for the Steelers. So we'll see whether Pickens plays this week. We'll see whether Kenneth Walker III plays this week.
I don't think we get Pickens this week. My 2 cents.
There you go. They play again, right? They play Saturday.
Yeah.
And then let's take a look at the semifinals of this matchup. Here's what we got. It is Daniel versus Trophy Smack, the 1 versus 5 seed. Meanwhile, the 2 and 3 take on each other, that being Mike and Tyler, our producer. So 4 of the top 5 teams meet in the semifinals of the Fantasy Focus Show League.
I'm the lowest scoring team. I have the worst record out of everybody, but I'm telling you right now, in spite of the David Montgomery injury,
you got a great team.
Is peaking at the right time.
You want to hear a crazy stat that I heard from David Rose, who's one of the great producers here on SportsCenter in the AM show, just thinking about George Pickens in that game on Saturday night. The Ravens have played the Steelers 8 consecutive times without scoring 20 points.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
The Ravens.
20 points for the Ravens.
That's crazy.
They're the second highest scoring team in the league, I believe, coming into this.
It's a crazy week because it's the playoffs, right? We know that this team has really struggled for whatever reason. Lamar Jackson plays teams like a fiddle most weeks. And then against the Steelers, it's like he's trying to solve a Rubik's Cube, but he's me and not Mike Clay.
Yeah.
It's absurd. 8 straight games without scoring 20 points against the Steelers.
That starts to do things to you, I think. When you struggle that much against a team, you got Mike Tomlin in Lamar's head.
Totally. I mean, I just don't know, it's not, you can't, I don't think you can bench Lamar.
No.
Obviously.
No.
But.
And there's always one,
uneasy?
it'll change at some point.
Of course, yeah, the straw that breaks the camel's back. But yeah, random note there. A lot of random notes this week.
Couple things I'm really hoping for at the end of this one. I still want Mike Evans to be able to get to 1,000 yards receiving, just like this is non-fantasy football, but I would love to see that happen. I still want Derrick Henry to hit 20 total touchdowns.
He's close.
He's close. He has not had the number of touchdowns we have wanted over the last couple weeks. It'd be great if he could just turn it on here at the end.
I'm into that.
For fantasy managers, so everyone will be into that.
You know what? My team that I had this week playing against Mike Clay that couldn't hit 90 points is probably going to have 150.
That's how it works.
Because that's how it goes, right?
Yep.
Weren't you the one saying you would rather lose by just a point or two or get blown out? And I was saying I'd rather get blown out. If I'm going to lose, I'm going to lose like the way I did to Mike, because I'm like, who could fault me for the Cooper Kupp, Darnell Mooney, Derrick Henry debacle? I mean, they were good players.
I think we all agree on this at least. If you're going to lose, at least lose because you set your best lineup, or even if you didn't set your best lineup, you didn't do something.
It wouldn't have mattered.
It wouldn't have made a difference.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
You don't look at your bench and go,
you're not like, if only I played this guy over that guy. That's a difference of 4 points. That's what I lose by. So,
We're all feeling your pain out there.
The Blues are upon us.
Lost this week. Yep.
All right, we're going to wrap things up here on Fantasy Focus. When we come back, we'll see you all in just one moment. Download the ESPN Bet Sportsbook to claim your new player bonus, and for a limited time, unlock access to 30 days of ESPN Plus to stream exclusive live sports. Sign up with the promo code FANTASY in order to get started today. Closing things out here on Fantasy Focus, my name is Daniel Dopp alongside Field Yates and Stephania Bell.
Yep.
Liz is going to be back tomorrow. We've got a Week 16 ranking show. You mentioned earlier today, Field, I'm really excited to dive into that Cleveland Browns pass catcher conversation.
Or not.
Oh, did we get some news?
No, I'm just saying I'm not excited to talk about Dorian Thompson
not excited
Robinson
about
starting,
it.
but we do have several quarterbacks that we are monitoring this week. It's not just the Browns, it's also the Titans, obviously the Chiefs. So a lot of notable quarterback situations that will dictate the outlook for players this week.
And a pretty big notable fantasy situation that I just want to mention really quickly, as Stephania Bell, the only ESPN personality still left going in Scott Fishbowl. Stephania, you made it to another round yet again.
How many people are left, do you know?
I think we're down to 250.
250.
I think it's wow.
There's 4,000 plus that enter into this tournament, obviously down to the final 250. Stephania, way to go.
I think that's it. I mean, I can't, because every week I just look at the cut line. I'm like, did I make it?
Yeah.
So I'm not great with knowing how, what the numbers are.
It might be 125 this week.
Even better?
I think it's
No, I
125
think it was. I think it was 250, and we're going into the. I think there's 2 more weeks. So I don't know. Whatever it
Not
is,
many.
whatever it is, there's not that many, and this is the one squad where I had all my great players show up. So it was nice to have something.
They understood the
it's nice to
assignment.
have this to root for myself.
Who are we rooting for here on your squad? Like, if we are Team
have
Stephania Bell.
Josh Allen. Thank you, Josh Allen, very
okay.
much.
Josh.
You're lucky.
We have Josh Allen. We have Alvin Kamara, so we hope that he's healthy enough to still go. We have Saquon Barkley, so we need a bigger week out of Saquon Barkley. We have Jamison Williams, Xavier Worthy. Who else do I have? Zay Flowers, Brandon Aubrey.
I care for all those
got a lot of.
Yep. Let's
Got a
go.
lot of good players.
I'm in.
I love it. Stephania, I'm so pumped to be able to root for you because I did not make it that far in Scott Fish.
Nor did I. Yeah.
But we got a couple other things that we're going to dive into. Like I said,
you,
we're going to be
Dana.
back tomorrow. Very big Week 16 rankings show, talking about where we think players should land here in your Week 16 rankings as you set your lineup for the fantasy playoffs. That's going to do it for us today. Our show was presented by Wingstop. Don't forget to love each other, be kind to yourself, and get ready to have Liz Loza back tomorrow. We'll see you guys
See
on
ya.
Wednesday.